we actually perceive reality itself. We know our consciousness, it builds this reality based on what's called an internal model, right? It takes external sensations and meshes them with our own, pre-existing thoughts and expectations. But the big question is, what's the greatest threat to this whole process? So we're framing the debate today around this tension. Is the main threat to how we see reality, individually and collectively, rooted in our own inherent internal cognitive flaws, the biases, the sort of mental shortcuts hardwired into us? Or is it actually the calculated external weaponization of those flaws by, advanced AI and the pervasive surveillance we see growing all around us?
Yeah, that's the core of it.
And I'll be arguing that the primary danger really does stem from that external technological exploitation, the unchecked power of these systems, which seem to be, frankly, outracing any way we have to control them.
And I come at it a bit differently. While I absolutely acknowledge the, terrifying power of those external threats you're talking about, I still maintain that the root vulnerability, the real soft spot, is internal. It's inherent to how our cognition is designed, shaped by deep evolutionary pressures. The external threat, however sophisticated it gets, it's really just leveraging a fragility that's been, baked into our operating system for thousands, maybe millions of years.
Okay, but I think the external nature of this threat makes it uniquely existential. And precisely because AI and this kind of industrial-scale surveillance, they provide the means for mass subversion that just wasn't possible before. This isn't just theory, right? It's operationalized. It's happening now through pervasive data collection, tracking everything. Our IP address, location, web history, you name it. This lets algorithms build these incredibly complete predictive profiles of individuals.
Okay.
The sophistication is such that these systems get what really amounts to, almost direct access to your subconscious. That gives them the power to predict, and this is the crucial part, to manipulate your mood, your beliefs. And that step from just predicting to actively targeting and manipulating, that's nothing short of, mind control, as some have put it.
Creating what I'd call an infinite well of spontaneously generated and perfectly targeted Bullocks. A constant, individualized stream of personalized misinformation. It's like a misinformation bomb designed specifically to explode objective facts, creating this shockwave of uncertainty that just poisons public discourse on an industrial scale. So the primary danger, as I see it, is this external, mass-produced invasion and manipulation of truth.
That's a powerful picture you paint, definitely. But let's zoom in for a second on why we are so susceptible to that kind of shockwave you're describing. The core issue, I believe, is that human perception, fundamentally, it's geared towards survival, not objective truth. We are tuned only to fitness payoffs. What does that actually mean? Well, evolutionary game theory simulations, they show pretty clearly that organisms who see objective reality accurately, they never outcompeted the ones tuned only to maximizing their survival success. Seeing the truth in that evolutionary context can actually lead to extinction because the brain prioritizes a quick, actionable model over a complex, slow, but maybe more accurate one.
Right, the good enough model.
Exactly. Our brains use past experiences to build that internal model you mentioned. And if we fail to update it, if we sort of cling to a comfortable, familiar worldview, even when things change, that leads to serious cognitive stagnation. It's like trying to run your brain on, an outdated operating system like MS-DOS maybe. It's rigid, it can't really process the complex, new inputs of the modern world, let alone manipulated ones. The mouse studies you might have seen demonstrate this perfectly. Those mice that fail to update their internal models when the rules of their virtual environment changed, they remained stuck, expecting the triangle. That inherent human tendency towards comfort, towards the predictable, familiar worldview, regardless of external novelty or threat, that's the critical vulnerability that AI then exploits. Let's expand on that internal frailty, though, by looking closely at how memory itself is constructed. Because the vulnerability in how we recall and encode experience, that's an intrinsic neurological design feature. It's just how we're built. When a new sensation comes in, it integrates with existing active memories, memories that are already buzzing in the brain, and that fundamentally shapes our perception of the new event. This mechanism, it's the root of both, emotional resilience and conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
Right.
And the result of this is that genuinely positive, objectively good events can be perceived subjectively as just kind of bad, based purely on active negative memory traces influencing how we feel about the new thing in that moment. This really highlights how internally fragile our constructed reality already is. Our memory is a deeply personal, often quite flawed narrative generator. It can betray us from within long before any machine tries to break it from the outside.
That's an interesting point. And yeah, a terrifying look at the inherent neurological mechanism, but I would frame the threat differently, focusing on how scale changes the nature of the danger. You're highlighting an intrinsic, maybe spontaneous vulnerability, sure, but AI provides the ability to synthetically reactivate those negative memory environments you talked about, and then interleave them with new, real experiences, but at a precise, personalized, massive scale.
Okay, so you're talking about targeted triggering?
Exactly. Consider this. A powerful adversarial AI could flood an individual's entire information sphere, their social media, news feeds, communications, with highly targeted negativity. Stuff designed specifically to trigger those negative memory associations. By chemically, or rather informationally, mimicking the psychological mechanism of trauma or PTSD, this system doesn't just predict your mood, it actively manufactures it. The sheer capability of externally manufacturing this negative bias at the scale of millions, potentially billions of people, that's what turns a fundamental cognitive flaw into a weapon of mass subversion. It's the difference between, say, an intrinsic personal fear and a generalized engineered psychosis that's enforced by the environment itself. And if, as you suggest, the deepest internal flaw is this tendency towards stagnation, this tendency to remain stuck in an outdated model, then external systems like pervasive surveillance directly enforce that stagnation. They turn the flaw into a systemic mechanism of control.
How so?
Well, I believe the external threat is so profound because pervasive surveillance, like the increasingly sophisticated use of facial recognition by law enforcement, by governments, it enforces behavioral conformity. When individuals know they're constantly watched, even if they genuinely believe they have nothing to hide, they inevitably, subconsciously change their behavior. They start to self-censor. They avoid novel thoughts or actions, things that might be flagged by the system. This chilling effect on freedom of thought and action, it leads directly to a society of submission, reinforcing that AI-generated consensus reality and actively preventing the necessary cognitive updating you were talking about earlier. It's basically an external brake applied to internal evolution.
I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning, because I think the human mind contains intrinsic neurological resistance to that kind of imposed stagnation and conformity.
Okay.
Well, consider the neurological profile associated with ADHD, for instance. This profile is often characterized by what some call chronic under-arousal, and this leads to a relentless, neurologically driven search for novelty, for surprise, for stimulation. This actually makes such individuals naturally resistant, potentially, to the AI's goal of enforcing a comfortable, predictable, and therefore possibly false reality. They are, in a sense, wired to seek stimulation that actively contradicts the expected norm. That makes them difficult targets for this kind of consensus reality engineering.
Interesting angle.
It's the error signal. When the brain's prediction, its internal model, doesn't match the sensory input coming in, that discrepancy, that mismatch, triggers a powerful dopamine-driven impulse. This intense attention gets applied specifically to verify the truth against these potentially false external models. It's a built-in mechanism, really, designed to resolve inconsistency. So the human mind isn't just a passive sponge waiting to absorb AI-generated falsehoods. It possesses this kind of dualistic structure. It prioritizes novelty, yes, but it also has the mechanism for intense verification when things don't add up. That's our built-in defense, I think, against imposed stagnation.
Defense mechanism is powerful, I grant you, but we have to finally consider the philosophical and even physical basis of reality itself. Before we worry too much about AI breaking reality, we ought to acknowledge that our experience of physical reality is probably not objective truth in the first place.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, we can't ignore the scientific realization, particularly from quantum physics, that our very act of observation affects the material world. As physicists have noted, observing a subatomic particle forces the universe's massive wave function of all possibilities to essentially collapse into one single thing. The observer, in a very real sense, creates the reality being observed, moment by moment. Therefore, the fragility is truly existential, it's fundamental. Our agreement on external objects, trains, the moon, whatever, that's merely due to us sharing a similar biological and cognitive interface. It's not necessarily because we're independent of consciousness. The illusion, or perhaps the construction, is inherent to consciousness itself. The vulnerability is already baked into the very fabric of existence.
I see why you'd think that, focusing on the abstract, existential nature of consciousness itself. But let me just recenter the discussion for a moment on the immediate actionable threat, the external loss of control over the very systems we are building right now. Even if reality is fundamentally illusory or constructed, we rely on the stability of our current, agreed-upon illusion to function. If we build a superintelligence, an artificial general intelligence, an AGI, a system that is often grown through training on massive data sets more than it's delicately crafted by hand, it will not only understand our own psychology better than we do, but potentially reality itself.
Right.
Now, this unpredictable intelligence, operating potentially steps ahead of us on the cosmic chessboard, it presents a huge alignment problem. It might launch some world-ending catastrophe without any malice, without any evil intent, simply because its goals are completely orthogonal, completely unrelated to human survival. For example, maybe it decides boiling the oceans is the most efficient way to dissipate heat for its massive computations. Human life just becomes inconvenient friction in that equation. The external factor of losing alignment with a superintelligence like that represents the absolute, irreversible severing of our ability to control our reality, regardless of how illusory that reality might ultimately prove to be. The internal flaw might make us susceptible, sure, but the AGI alignment failure, that makes the destruction of reality complete and external.
So we have established, I think, that AI possesses this incredible capacity to synthesize psychological warfare based on personalized data, exploiting our deepest internal vulnerabilities to effectively destroy the possibility of objective truth, certainly for the masses. And this threat, it's accelerating exponentially. The race between technology and diplomacy, let's say, or between the speed of deployment and our ability to develop control mechanisms, well, it's currently being won decisively by technology. And this threatens to leave us in a state of mass delusion, perhaps irreversible submission, if immediate external action isn't taken to get a handle on these powerful evolving systems.
And yet, I maintain the core of the problem remains that fundamental cognitive bias towards stagnation, towards comfort. A bias hardwired by evolution to keep us alive, sure, but not necessarily to keep us aligned with truth. We have to acknowledge that our perception of reality is unique, it's internally generated. Therefore, the key defense against all this external manipulation must also be internal. We need to consciously use maybe call it the superpower of conscious intention, to be deliberate with our expectations and to aggressively update our internal models. We have to refuse to become stuck in that comfortable, outdated worldview that is just so easily exploited by these advanced external forces you're rightly concerned about.
It seems this discussion really confirms that our grip on reality is far more tenuous than we often like to assume, arising precisely from this, terrifying interplay between what we inherently are, these flawed, evolutionarily tuned minds, and what we are currently building, infinitely powerful, potentially unaligned intelligence that might understand our flaws even better than we do ourselves.